Hi, Gretchen. Nice to see you. I'm really glad that you're joining us today. I'm excited to talk about multilingual learners and math and, um, kind of see what you can help other teachers with in that regard. So thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
The first thing I always ask everybody is their math background. What were your experiences as a math learner, both growing up in school, but also if you have anything about your math experiences as an adult, you would be willing to share, that'd be great.
Yeah, so great question. I I guess as a kid, I felt like math did not come easily to me. I remember having to do like the times tables and I felt like I wasn't as fast and like I remember getting drilled at home with times tables and flashcards and um uh I felt like for like my father loved math and my dad's side of the family all did. Like euchre was a big part of our life, like playing a lot of card games. And I felt like my cousins just all had such a fast mathematical automaticity. And I didn't really have that. And I felt like it was more almost like a deficiency in myself. Um, there's some math classes I really enjoyed. Like I really did I liked my algebra class, but I felt like I didn't really understand my geometry class. So I just kind of had this perception of myself as somebody who for whom math is more of a struggle and not something that came easily. And then my husband too, like he just has like this wonderful mathematical conception. Like he understands things in a way that I feel like I've always just been more that math fact memorization type person. Um, like I feel like the way that the new ways of instructing math, like my husband just automatically understands that type of conceptual thinking that I lacked. I'd say as an adult, I, definitely learned that we can all learn anything. And I've been surprised to learn how much I absolutely love data and understand. But I think it's like when you can apply it to your own context and the world, the like when it is used to make sense of your own something in your life and it becomes more meaningful. So I would say that I'm on the journey and feel like I'm learning from experts such as yourself more and more about maybe why some of these shifts that have happened in math instruction is so important and valuable. Kind of wish I would have had some of those experiences as a kid.
Yeah, yeah.
Too late to learn, but I just really appreciate the way instruction has been moving and shifting.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. You hit on something that's incredibly important is relevancy, right? If you don't understand how it's relevant to you, it doesn't have a lot of meaning. But once somebody helps you understand how that math can be relevant to your life and how it can be useful to you, it really expands your relationship with it and creates a positive relationship. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
um, sounds like something that's happened to you. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
Um, well, you're here as a multilingual expert. And that's really what I want to talk about today is multilingual learners, how we might be able to start thinking about supporting them in different ways. But before we get into that, I want to know a little bit more about you and like, how did you become interested in multilingual learners and kind of what's your background in that regard?
Yeah, thank you. So my background is as a high school history teacher. I taught at La Follette High School in Madison for 8 years, and the role itself was as a history teacher, world history, and other content area courses, but also with this added dimension of having newcomers classes for newcomers, as well as uh, classes where I would have students who were like clusters of multilingual learners in my mainstream classes, they called it at the time. And going back at the same time and getting my EL and bilingual licenses added on so that I would have those skills to instruct the language development and support with culturally sustaining teaching practices in the classroom, but with usually I had all learners in my classroom, students, you know, all kiddos with IEPs, students with who are learning multiple languages. And then after La Follette, my husband, well, when we had little babies, we wound up moving up to Neenah to live next to grandma and grandpa on the farm. And
Hmm.
at that time, I started working at Menasha High School, also as a high school history teacher, but this time it was within the dual language program at Menasha. So I was teaching world history, US history, and civics via Spanish language. But the student population were in the two-way immersion program. So I had kiddos who were had formerly exited from EL services, but were native Spanish speakers, and kiddos who were second language learners, Spanish speakers. So I had both students and supporting their learning of social studies as well as their language development in two languages, with
Yep.
Spanish. We're bridging into English. Um, then I became the EL bilingual coordinator for the dual language program at Menasha, as well as we have not all kids were in the dual language program, so there was another track for co-teaching and
Okay.
a lot of work. So I supported our EL our programming, and our student population was 15% of our student body were ELs. So all teachers really had to know how to meet the needs of students in their classrooms. And a lot of
Yeah.
the work I did was supporting gen ed teachers too. Like, how do we pull all these pieces together? How do we support that tier one? Um, and we did a lot of work then on really supporting with those best practices and with bringing in the ELD standards too. And then I came to CESA 2 in 2020 and with the role of dual language expert or dual language consultant and EL, but expanded into um, really, I come at it with this viewpoint of tier one is supporting all learners and having that access that they need. For ML students, it also means it's at a dimension of the ELD standards. And And that means that it's really growing in the academic language of the content area. And if you think about it, all of the students in that classroom come in with a home language or all students come in with their own linguistic varieties. And teachers are helping all of the students make meaning and move on this continuum of really developing that more precise language of the discipline, that learning language and literacy, which is also our framework. It's learning language and literacy integrated framework for teaching. So it's not that it's only this group of kiddos need this. I would say all of your students in some ways need this, and it's meant to support teachers in knowing how to do that.
Awesome. Yeah. It makes me think, math is this unique content area that you learn a lot of um, rules and processes,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of conceptual understanding that needs to develop. But it also is this unique content area that has very specific language and vocabulary that students need to understand and be able to use in order to be successful in mathematics.
Right.
Um, and you threw out an acronym, ELD, and I'm not sure that
Yeah.
everybody listening will know what ELD standards are. And then I'm going to add on to there something that I've been learning about this year is the WIDA standards. And so I know that there's these two sets of standards, and that's a world that you are very well versed in. Can you explain a little bit what the ELD
Yeah.
standards are, and then maybe a little bit about WIDA as well?
Sure. So ELD literally stands for English Language Development. We have English Language Development Standards. So English learners are a protected class. They have the right that's been won through Supreme Court cases to English language development and meaningful access to grade level content participation. And one of the ways that that is measured is through every year students who are English learners take what's called the access test or some
Hmm.
form of a test that measures that ELD. 44 states in the United States have adopted the WIDA English Language Development Standards, and WIDA produces the access test. Um, but not every state uses WIDA. Like, for example, California uses their own set of standards. New York just changed over to WIDA. Texas also has their own form. But per ESSA, every state or how that state runs their educational department must use some form of the language development standards. And in Wisconsin, we've adopted the WIDA standards. We're like local control. So school districts do have the right to choose a different form of ELD standards if they would so choose. But I've yet to find a district that doesn't use WIDA.
Right.
Most do that one. And
Yeah.
so districts must adopt those standards. So those are to be integrated into they're not taught separately. They're taught alongside the content standards. And really, when the WIDA standards were developed, they were developed by experts that analyzed the content standards and looked at what is the language of those content standards. And so, for example, in math, they're built on the math standards, they're built on the math practice standards.
Okay.
And you really see that with the way, like the WIDA math standards, for example, are um, language of explanation, language of argument, so that justification, and really getting at, like you were describing, that more like math is its own language, and the standards are built on what is the language of each discipline and how that discipline works.
Okay.
So that is what that means.
And WIDA, what does that stand for? That's an acronym
Yeah,
as well.
that is an acronym. It stands for World Class Instructional Design and Assessment. WIDA is located at UW-Madison, but they are much bigger than our state. They're a consortium of over 44 states and multiple countries. And really, they produce all kinds of amazing, wonderful resources, as well as the ELD. And we have many districts in our CESA 2 region that also have dual language programming. And so for dual language programs, that is teaching content either at 50% of the day, particularly in Spanish, 50% in English. And for those students in that type of programming, we also have the Marco Dale, which are the version of the ELD standards, but in Spanish. So the academic Spanish language development standards
Yep.
aligned with the content areas. So those programs are using both.
Okay. So if I'm understanding things correctly, the ESSA ensures that students that are identified as English language learners, there's a set of standards that we need to be thinking about to
Yeah.
support those students because they have the right to develop that language as needed. And the WIDA standards help us kind of navigate the content areas by bringing out those language components that are necessary for those students to be able to be successful in those content areas. Is that a quick summary?
That's a beautiful summary. That's exactly it. And
Okay, awesome.
actually, a school's report card on the ESSA report card, 5% of that report card is also based on the growth that English learners are expected to be making on their English language development. And so you had asked before too about what do those scores mean? And so um, it takes on average about six to 7 years to learn academic language. For example, you were to get dropped off in Mexico, Matt, I don't believe you speak Spanish, correct?
I have a little bit, but not very much. No.
So, in 1 to 2 years, you would be, probably socially proficient. You would be able to ask for a taxi, order some food, etc., have like everyday conversation. Um,
Sure.
But if you were to go to school, potentially within 6 to 7 years, you would have to be able to develop that academic language of the classroom and the content areas. That because, and you think about the amount of language, the preciseness of the language, as you move from a one to a two to a three, the language demands to explain the content gets more and more complex. You move into more complex sentences. You move into those technical terms and that really packed, dense information that we call noun groups, where all that meaning lives. That cause and effect reasoning type of things. That's the language that needs to show up to get those higher levels. And that so like even the access test, for example, is measuring students that precision across all the content areas. And students, every student in the state of Wisconsin has an expected rate of exit. And so we can determine if that student is moving on their language development growth. Unfortunately, in our state, we often find that we have many students who are kind of get stuck at about a level three. And they get stuck and they don't really move from middle school to high school. And that can show up where it looks like maybe students, it could be for many reasons. It could be students don't understand the point of the test. But it also could be that sometimes those students can fall through the cracks in terms of how to support their language development and how to really make some meaningful next steps to support that growth on that continuum to help support them in developing that more complex type of language to show what they know. Like when you're just math is abstract and that conceptual piece, that's what we're trying to get them to be able to express and to understand. So long-winded answer to your question.
In a little bit here, we're going to go over a tool that you developed that can help teachers kind of plan around some things. But I want to dig in just a little bit more into access scores. You'd mentioned that you talked about the scores themselves. First of all, can you just kind of share a little bit about what a student does and then how they get scored in that regard? Like just a little bit about, I know that, I worked in schools for a long time. I felt like January was a really busy time for the EL teachers, right? They were doing testing and I always knew it had something to do with EL learners, but I wasn't quite sure what that test looked like and like what that score kind of meant. Can you provide a little bit about first, just like, what are we looking for or how are the students being assessed?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the access test is going to measure students listening, speaking, reading, and writing. And it literally is in the language of the content areas.
Okay.
And it will be students have to they take a listening test, they take a speaking test. And that speaking is, again, measuring their academic language of how they are able to produce that language. They're reading and they're doing a writing piece. And so that writing piece could be a mathematical argument or it could be a scientific explanation. And then the evaluation will be at the discourse level. How well did they understand the genre of what they're producing? At the sentence level and at the word phrase level. And so when you get a student's access report, you're going to see what's called a composite score. And that composite score is literally a combination of the reading, writing, listening, and speaking. And the reading and the writing are weighted more heavily in the score profile. So it is really helpful to take a look at that. Well, what's that kind of overall, but then to look at the different domains and to see where students are at. And that's going how to like support students with that instructional next pieces.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I want to get into next. My experience with access scores is I would often know what the student's access score was. And your explanation here is telling me that it's really this composite of these variety of things that students are asked to do. But what I saw as a teacher was like, oh, I have a student with an access score of 3 or 4 or whatever the case may be. And I had a kind of an inkling of what that meant, but I really didn't understand,
Okay.
what that score meant. And I don't want to get into the details specifically about each score, but in conversations that I've had with you over the last couple of weeks, you kind of highlighted the difference between a 3 and a 4 for me in a way that really opened my eyes to what that meant for instruction in the classroom. Would you mind just kind of briefly sharing about like, what might a score of a 3 versus a 4, a little bit of difference between what we might expect from a student in that regard?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I want to be um, careful in saying that the score, uh, it, students, it doesn't mean what students, it's like where they're at right now in terms of their language development, but in terms of their conceptual understanding, we want to be able to provide multiple ways to help students really develop the conceptual learning and multiple ways of understanding like what students are able to produce. So, like for example, um, let's say we have a newcomer. Well, we could utilize the student's home language to show conceptually what they understand, and we can build from where they're at. They might be able to produce a whole explanation in home language that shows us what they know. It also shows us where they're at with their home language academic language development. But then we can also take that and build on it for that next piece. Okay, we can support uh, how now can we support their English language development? How can we help them start to build some explanation in using some academic vocabulary or with a turn and talk partner using this particular sentence stem or language routine to
Mm-hmm.
develop some of that math language. Additionally, sometimes we find maybe more at the high school, middle school, or high school level, sometimes our students become what we call long-term English learners. And this might be where they've been in the system for so long, and it's almost like that EL label has become invisible. And they're maybe kind of stuck at this level 3. And what might that look like? Sometimes it looks like students are having some trouble with reading or writing in that more academic level. And and that might be an area that we can then zoom in on and really try to support both understanding conceptually, but also what's that next piece to help them grow in that language development. And sometimes that also shows up in, oftentimes we find that students who are long-term English learners may not have the outcomes on forward or other standardized measures. And so by bolstering that language development, we can have an impact on supporting students academically too.
Yeah, that's a really important distinction. If a student may understand mathematically the concepts that are being covered in the classroom, but are we able to support them in expressing what they know,
Right.
and getting from them what they're thinking about? And I can assure you that I made mistakes in the past as a classroom teacher about assuming that because a student wasn't able to share their thinking in the way that I was expecting, that they didn't understand the material, which they may or may not have. I just didn't know. And digging into the access scores can be a helpful way of doing to understanding what a student might need in terms of being able to express what they know.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I think about Matt, both of our lenses and how the WIDA standards are not meant to be taught in isolation. And I think about the expertise of the math teacher and the way the math practices are meant. Like, for example, um, a common EL technique is to pre-teach vocabulary, right? Like I was
Mhm.
taught that as a best practice years
Yep.
ago. I've had to unlearn that. That is actually not a best practice depending on the discipline, right? And in math, it isn't. Like you
Yeah.
need, and you can explain more, but it's because it conceptually doesn't help students' development. And so the unlearning piece is we don't pre-teach vocabulary. We use all the linguistic resources that students bring, and then we add on to that. And that way, all students are that academic language learner. But we can do it with that lens of how can we also support our students with the ELD needs to continue to grow their language development and their learning.
Yeah, and that aligns with how we would support all students.
Yeah.
I think about the early elementary students that are using the term plussing, right? I was plussing, and how we go. That's a very common term to use because we assign this word plus to
Yeah.
addition, and so then they
It's
turn it
actually
into a
really,
verb.
and it's sophisticated in a way, right? Because they're
Yeah.
understanding conceptually what it means.
Yep. And then, but what we do is we hear that and then we give them a different word to replace that with, right? I was
Yeah.
adding. Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, I heard you say plus. And remember, we're going to use the word adding when we're doing this. And so,
And I would
um,
call that recasting. You're recasting, you're building on their linguistic repertoire of the resources they're bringing in, and you're helping now move them on that precise math talk of the
yep.
discipline.
So that's called recasting. See, I just learned
Yeah.
something new.
Yeah. And all of your kids may need that at some point.
I would say that I've never been in a math classroom as a teacher where I didn't need to recast at some point. And
Yeah.
I've covered everything from elementary all the way through eighth grade and into high school.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And how important that moment is, though, for them to see, for you to know that they get it
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
conceptually. And that's, I guess, my point that all language is good language and needed. And then how and when do we decide to move as a teacher based on what our students are bringing? Like, do we go towards the more abstract or less abstract? And a lot of times teachers will say, put this in your own words. And that's good because it means that the students understand it. But we can't lead kids there. We need to help also build towards that more abstract conceptual type language because that's what the discipline requires of that uh, more abstract phenomena. And a lot of the disciplines require that. Well, actually, they all do.
They do. Yep. Yep. And I think that that's another really important point is that um, when we're thinking about the goals that we have of our math lesson,
Mm-hmm.
um, it's often we look at those as we want to get kids to this point. And we have to also realize that, like, no, that's just like a stepping stone, and we're building on that. And what I'm hearing you saying is that for EL learners, yes, we want to get them to a point where we're able to understand their thinking and maybe we're making some accommodations to support them in sharing their thinking in their home language or whatever the case may be. But we also have to continue helping them develop the English language that
Yeah.
they're going to need to be using as they continue on.
And of your math content area. And I would say that this is why pull-up doesn't work because Matt, I will never be able to bring the expertise and depth of understanding that you have as a math teacher to support the students. And then we create gaps when we do that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
We need to
And
bring
that
expertise together.
it really makes me think about my experiences in like PLCs and planning instruction and being able to sit with both my colleagues who are math teachers, but also having the EL specialist in the room with us to help us understand how we can support our EL learners
Right.
through our math instruction and not just oh, well, the EL learner is going to come in and somehow magically make the student,
It's always the
understand
magic
the
taste,
math.
right? Like
Right.
magic sauce, but it's both of these things together. And
Yeah.
also, like at some point, I really do think like maybe the language specialist is supporting the content teacher and seeing the language, but eventually, like this is gonna just I think it makes so much sense to content teachers when they can take a look at it and they have the tools to do it.
Well, speaking of tools, I want to look at a tool that you developed
Yeah.
recently. And if you're listening at home, I will let you know that this podcast is being recorded as well. It's on YouTube, so if you want to go check it out, we're gonna screen share it a little bit, but also that you can head to the Lyft website. The link will be in the podcast description, and so you can head over there and actually view this tool. So Gretchen, I'm looking at this thing. It's called the Lyft Next Day Fix Tool. I know that you have a 5.8 or a K5 version, and I'm looking at the 6.12 version right now. Real quick, like what's a brief overview of this tool, and then we'll dig into a couple of the pieces of it.
Yeah, so this is really meant as it's a formative, it's a quick way to look at what has the student produced and to think about, well, it's also meant to hold pieces together for a teacher, to a way to integrate looking at what your students are doing with their content standards, but also that language development and that literacy component. And so you first off start by looking at, okay, what's the task and what's the genre? And that genre piece might be, it's through the lens of the discipline, but the WIDA standards are done through genre. For example, with math, there's the language of explain and the language of argue. And so when you look at your content area and you look at the task at hand, is it one of these particular genres? And then you look at, okay, you look at the student work and you look at what did students understand and where did they struggle? You can define, oh, most struggled, or there was mixed results, or many succeeded. And so it's kind of figuring out, okay, what's the barrier here? Or what's the next step, so to speak. So
Can
you
I
look at,
can
go
I
ahead.
ask a clarifying question
Yeah.
about that part? So when we're looking at student work, and we're talking specifically about EL students, are we looking
You look
at
at
the
all your
whole
kids.
class? Okay, yeah,
Yeah. In
yeah.
fact, when I just did this with teachers, we looked at all the students, and then people brought in specifically some of the ML students to look at strategically too.
Okay, okay. And so we look at that and we're trying to find some patterns,
Yep.
and maybe identifying patterns both on success side of things, like what's a
Yes.
pattern where the students do really well,
Yep.
and then where some areas that they struggled. And then I also see that there's, an opportunity to identify some mixed results, like maybe
Mhm.
we're not quite sure where the barriers are.
Right. And if most succeeded, maybe it's like, what's the next piece to keep grow that learning and that extension part? Um, so then the barrier, like, is it a is it a thinking gap? Do the students understand the concept? Is it an expression gap? Like they're missing some vocabulary or their sentences aren't quite right for what we're expecting. Um, or is it both?
Hmm.
And I think really this tool was put together with the intention of thinking from a teacher is thinking about their sequence of instruction, both at the lesson level, but also at the unit level. And they're thinking about how am I growing students conceptually? How do I get them to that end point? Where are they currently at? What do I need to teach again, etc. So, and so here we have that thinking and expression demand laid it out like a continuum.
Yeah, yeah.
And you're moving from somewhere on this continuum. Usually, when you start a unit, it's more concrete. You have some sort of like, I guess if it's science, you might have a lab for students to do. Maybe you have social studies, maybe it's like a video about something, like something that's more tangential, hands-on, and experience. And then you move during the course of instruction, you're getting students to think and just more deeply understand those bigger conceptual pieces, those phenomenon that you're working to teach. And that's going to require more abstract, precise language, that language of the textbook, but also that language of the explanation or the justification. And to really take that concrete experience they might have had and now move from beyond that, just that here and now, to how does this represent the idea? And sometimes
Yep.
kids get stuck in the here and now and only talk about that one piece, but they're not able to conceptualize it. And so you're thinking about how to move them. And this tool then, when we get to that next part, is kind of a way to help teachers diagnose where kids are at with both their thinking and their expressing.
Yeah, this really aligns for me, just thinking in mathematical terms. We have uh, various ways of representing mathematics, but on a really simple level, sometimes we might say it goes from concrete to representational to abstract.
Yes.
And whether I'm thinking about early elementary and concrete, where students are literally taking Unifix cubes and putting them together and making a bundle of 10 and realizing that that has a meaning to it and we can use that and expand on that. Or I'm thinking about my days in teaching algebra, and in order for students to understand functions and be able to use tables and graphs, we started with a concrete real world situation, right?
Yeah.
And so we started there and we moved them across from that concrete thing. Then that representational is generally like a variety of ways which we could show that with drawings or graphs or tables. But then the
Right.
abstract piece is really the numbers and the equations that we developed out of that, which by themselves make no sense unless you have all of this other stuff.
And then
And
it
so,
requires explanation, right?
yes, yes. And so I'm seeing this connection here between what you're presenting here is really focused on moving students along this continuum as English learners or multilingual students. And it aligns perfectly to the continuum that we use in math to move students along
Mhm.
from whatever the new concept is into a phase where they have that kind of automaticity, they have that familiarity with those really technical pieces, whether that's the language, whether that's the
Right.
equations and the numbers, whatever the case may be. Can we dig into this next part? Because this next
Yep.
part is really, really interesting to me. I'm going to have you kind of just share a little bit about what you're seeing here. And then I want to add on to when we had our conversation about it earlier, some of the ways I see this connecting to the NCTM teacher practices.
Right. I just really appreciate the way you just described the math continuum of learning. And as you were describing it, I was literally thinking about this chart and how it represents the different components of instruction. And so every step here is important. And so, for example, the chart is organized into two parts. We have the thinking and we have the expression. And across a unit, you have students start off by experiencing something that thinking through doing component, whatever that looks like in your content area, and the concept being inseparable from the action. And then the students have to describe that, right? They're starting to describe those ideas. They're holding the concept in their mind. They're recounting it. But that recounting is not yet an explanation. They need to move from that describing now to organizing, classifying, structuring that concept. What are the relationships here? And then we move into an explanation. What's the cause and the relationship and the effect piece? And then potentially, and not always, but sometimes some units maybe would end at explanation.
Mm.
Or maybe they won't. Maybe they go on and go farther, and the students are expected to generalize now and abstract that or theorize and transfer the concept. All of those components requires particular language moves to do this.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And some of our students may have some of that language, they know how to do it. And I worry sometimes that we privilege those students and we don't always teach others because we maybe don't know how to teach it or how to see it. And so this tool is meant as a way to unpack where the kids are. And so the next layer is, excuse me, expression. And this can be both. I think of this in terms of both talk as talk and listening, as
yep.
well as the written construction.
Mm-hmm.
And and so again, with that experiencing component, students might express this through gestures, actions, manipulations, phrases, everyday language, home language, I don't know, acting it out, for example.
Yeah.
Um,
Yep.
and then we move into the describing, which now you're retelling, you're representing how this happened. You might be labeling, sketching, narrating, etc. And then you have organizing, and that's what you were talking about before, Matt, like with representing this through tables, diagrams. In a different content area might be a different way you're showing this. And then as you move into the explaining now, this is constructing that explanation with connecting those ideas using that cause and effect language. It might be a proof, a written proof, etc. And then you have the generalizing where students are producing more distant, they have a claim about
Mm.
why something is this way. And they're explaining that generalization concept. Or it's a disciplinary argument. And every content area has this continuum. And so when you think about your lesson, you can identify where is this lesson at first in both the thinking expectation and the expression expectation. You figure that out, and then you look at your students' work. Where are these students at? Did they get it at the thinking level? Do I need to move on to the next stage, or do I need to go back and support that conceptual understanding? Or and they got it, okay. Where are they at with the expression piece? And what's that
Mm.
next step, and how to move them on that language continuum? And not to leave
There's
them at the first level and accept that, right? But we can teach how to move both. And so one of the teachers I was doing this with, the math middle school teachers in Beloit, said his takeaway was all of my students are academic language learners, not just my EL students. And I was like, you got it. And that's exactly it.
Yeah, that is exactly it. There's so many things running through my head right now about connections to things specifically in mathematics. I think about the student practice standards immediately. You know, we're asking students to construct a viable argument, critique the
Yeah.
reasoning of others. We're asking for students to look for and make use of structure. Um, I could go on and on. Model with mathematics, right? So there's all of these connections just in this, extremely like simple but really important, well laid out table that we're looking at right now. I also think about the teacher practices, and two of them that are really coming up for me are establishing mathematics goals to focus learning, right?
Mhm.
So as teachers, we really need to know what we're looking for from our students.
Yeah.
But the other one that really connects for me with from the EL lens is elicit and use evidence of student thinking.
Yes.
And that's, I think, a gap that most of us as regular classroom teachers have. How do I elicit evidence from a
Right.
student who is still working on their English language development? And that's where that collaboration with the EL specialists in our spaces is so important because I, as a classroom teacher, really need their support to help me elicit that evidence of student thinking.
I absolutely love what you just said. And then if we know what the end goal is, we can backwards map onto this unit. Where are those moments of opportunity in our lessons? Like you just described, and then what is that step students need to show the expression that's required to get them to that end goal, potentially of explanation? When might I need to model the language of an explanation, even so students know what to expect and point out, hey, we need this particular piece here. Like you're, you want to crack the code for kids, make the code explicit of what that language looks like. And the thing about the WIDA standards is they just give you the code of the language that's required at your grade level and in your content area. So you don't have to be a linguist. You have to know what your expectations are, and then you can make those language moves part of what all the kids are doing in your unit.
And I think that that's a really important point is that it isn't you're doing this just for a certain group of students. You're
Right.
doing this for everybody. It benefits every single student in your classroom when you're engaging in these practices.
And it also kind of gives you some of that why as a teacher. Like sometimes I would, go to a training or hear from a coach. Like you need to do this. Why don't you try this strategy? And I would try it because I respect their expertise, but I didn't always know why I was doing it for kids. And this gives you that. okay, like this is why now we're going to add in some of those math language routines. And we're going to add them in with this particular language development goal of the kids are going to use this academic vocabulary, or they're going to use this cause and effect sentence frame to, so if they have it orally and then we ask them to go and write it, we're going to start building that into trying on that type of language and producing that type of language.
Wow. Yeah, and I'm that makes me think of a couple of other things. The math language routines, which we could go. I mean, this podcast could last a couple of hours. We could keep going about all of the
We're gonna
connections.
have some stuff coming out of this, Matt.
Yeah, we definitely are.
All the new opportunities we're going to develop.
Because that really is the ultimate question when you're a classroom teacher. Okay, great. How am I going to do this? I
Right.
think we've talked a lot about the why, and we have this tool here that can help a little bit with the how. But we still need some of those strategies and those routines, and those math language routines are an excellent way of kind of understanding how to interact with and engage students that are multilinguals. And then, but also those things benefit every single student in the classroom. So um, I want to I want to wrap up with this tool just real quick. Can you kind of describe this last little piece?
Yeah. So really, I think you just kind of did describe it. So it's like, all right, so the content move, what's next step for my class? Is it a concept that I need to clarify or extend? Is it that literacy of math? Do I need to support students with how they're reading, writing, listening, or speaking or reasoning the math concept? Is it a particular language piece that they need next? And also thinking about what's that um, math talk? And I would say maybe how does that, like putting all those pieces together into that math talk could even be a next step. Not that you have to do all four, but you kind of just figure out what is that next piece to move the students along on that continuum to get them to that more abstract conceptual understanding that you're going for by the end of the unit.
I appreciate you saying you don't have to do all four of these. It's more about being intentional with something that's going to support your EL students, and it has the added benefit of benefiting all of the students in your space.
Right. And
Yep.
hopefully providing some clarity for the teacher of not feeling murky about the language piece, kind of like really being able to visualize all
Mm-hmm.
that go into it.
Yeah. Well, this is an awesome tool, Gretchen. I really appreciate you walking us through this and having some more clarity around how to use this tool. We're going to link to the Lyft website. So listeners, if you're interested in accessing this tool, you'll be able to do that through the link that will be into the description here. Gretchen, I know that you have an event coming up in June. Is it,
Yeah,
can people still register for that?
absolutely. So we have our ML Summit. It's happening at Sun Prairie as the host. This is our third annual ML Summit. We're so appreciative and grateful to Sun Prairie for being willing to host it. And this is an opportunity to really celebrate Wisconsin excellence in support of ML students. And so um, we have done invitation only for our presenters. They're excellent. And we would love to have all of you come and check this out. It's a wonderful opportunity to come together in fellowship and celebration at the end of the school year in support of all the work that folks are doing.
Yeah, I'm very excited. I know that I'll be presenting. I haven't finalized it yet, but I'm hoping to talk about the math language
That'll
routines.
be wonderful.
That would be my hope and be able to share some information about those and actually support people in getting going with using them in the fall. So,
Yeah, we're really
um,
excited for you to do that.
is there a registration deadline right now?
I don't believe so, but
Okay.
we can
Okay.
also provide the sign up link on this podcast too.
Yep.
The
We'll be
children.
sure to do that. Yeah. Gretchen, as we close, do you have a couple of takeaways that you just if you hear nothing else today, let's make sure that we walk away kind of knowing this or thinking about this.
Yeah, I'd really love for teachers to know that all students in their classroom are academic language learners of their content areas, and they don't have to do something different in support of their students with that EL label, um, and that it's really meant to support that deep conceptual understanding.
I'm going to add a takeaway that I think was really powerful for me to realize, and that I hadn't really thought about is when we're assessing students, whether formatively or summatively, whatever the case may be, when we're thinking about our EL students in particular, it's incredibly important for us to figure out how to access their thinking if they are still developing their English language skills and not assuming that because they couldn't explain it or write it down that they don't understand it. Because I think that's the way that we're going to create more gaps. And if we can overcome that, we'll be better equipped to support our students with the actual learning of the academic content that they need.
Love that. I guess maybe a third takeaway would be how important um, the content area expertise is to rigorous learning. And students need to, especially our multilingual learners, need access to their content area teachers, and their content area teachers um, need to be supported by language specialists to know how to do those moves. And once you know them, they're not hard.
Right. Right. Yep. But that collaboration is incredibly important. Yep.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Gretchen. I really enjoyed speaking with you today. I learned a ton. I hope our listeners learned a ton as well. And I'm excited that you're going to offer this event. Hopefully, some of you can attend that, and if not, at least check out the Lyft website and grab that tool. And
Coming up as well in August, which is being hosted by Wanakee School District, a 2 day
okay,
on August 13th and 14th.
awesome, awesome. Well, thanks again, and thanks to our listeners. And Gretchen, I hope you have an awesome rest of your day.
You too, Nat. Thank you so much.